Wait, is there an election coming up?
Look at these 3 words written larger than the rest, with a special pride never written before or since. Tall words proudly saying, "We the people."
Hi, folks, and welcome to another episode of Remedial Civics with the Lex Rex Institute, where we try to do our part to ensure that our Constitution is upheld by educating those who likely haven't ever read it. Alex couldn't be with me today, so it's just me. He wasn't feeling too well, but don't worry, he will be back again next week. You only have to endure me just this once. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at a totally non-controversial subject, one that I don't think is bound to engender any controversy whatsoever, and that is, of course, the recent indictment of former President Donald J. Trump on 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree, under New York Penal Law, Section 175.10. Now, what we're going to do is break down the elements of that offense, and then we'll examine how that law works. And lastly, we're going to answer some of the perplexing questions about why this is happening, what we can expect to happen next, and whether there's a strong case here. And most importantly, probably, who exactly was defrauded by all this? Let's get started. So first, let's dive into the elements of this offense. So elements are the specific legal standards that prosecutors have to prove if they want to get a conviction. In most cases, they're really the sort of thing that you would hope prosecutors would look up ahead of time. But, well, let's just see. Anyway, first element is 1. Defendant made or caused a false entry in the business records of an enterprise. 2. The defendants did so with the intent to defraud. And 3. The defendant's intent to defraud included an intent to commit another crime or aid or conceal the commission of another crime. Now, that last element we don't have to look at too much. That's basically what ratchets this up from second degree to first degree. And generally, you have to charge a different crime for that crime that it aided the commission of. Generally, you can't just list a bunch of the same crime and say that you committed it in furtherance of that other one. But that's neither here nor there. Let's look at the actual elements of the offense. So 1 and 2 are going to be the focus here. And looking at those, a few things jump out at us here. 1, there has to be a false entry in the records of a business. That record, then, 2, has to be intentional. And most importantly, the intent has to be an intent to defraud. So this word defraud, of course, has come up a few times already, and I'm sure that we all kind of have a basic intuition about what this is. If you've ever been sold a knockoff product on eBay, I'm sure that you've experienced that feeling. But what actually is fraud, legally speaking? Well, the legal definition of fraud from Black's Law Dictionary is a knowing misrepresentation of truth or concealment of a material fact to induce another to act to his or her detriment. That last part's important. To induce another to act to his or her detriment. Now, with that in mind, it's going to be worth asking at this point, because the prosecutors are certainly going to have to answer it later, who exactly are we claiming that Trump induced to act to their detriment? Think about that. Anyway, that's the charge. And boy, is it ever. They charge them with the same exact thing 34 times. That's because the business records at issue here are payments that President Trump is alleged to have made over a span of time, so there's more than one of them. There's essentially one charge here for every time that a check was issued, or every time that a check was entered into a business ledger, or really any time anybody wrote down anything about those payments in a business record. Frankly, I'm kind of surprised they didn't add a charge for every dollar that he spent on these alleged payoffs. Maybe they could have charged him for each individual key press while typing the entries. Boy, they must have been slacking off. Must have been a Friday. So, what's their support for these allegations? Well, conveniently, they actually issued, along with this indictment, what they call a statement of facts. And in a move that I'm sure will be forever remembered as one that altered campaign finance etiquette, the prosecution alleged that Trump orchestrated a scheme of payouts to his attorney, who then made transfers of that money to a shell corporation, who would then make payouts to various individuals. Most notably, of course, the infamous Stormy Daniels. Now, this was done allegedly to keep these people quiet and then thereby suppress negative information about Donald Trump, and by doing that, influence the results of the 2016 presidential election in his favor. Well, call me crazy, but I thought the whole point of a political campaign was to suppress the bad stuff about yourself and exaggerate the good stuff. That's kind of just par for the course. Now you tell me there are rules against using hush money to do that? Well, oddly enough, actually no, not exactly. Trump's real problem here, says the New York District Attorney, and the reason that his office apparently thinks charging Trump under Section 175.10 is a good idea, is because Trump apparently misclassified those payments. Rather than classifying them as, I don't know, hush money payments? Well, rather than doing that, apparently Trump suffered under the insane delusion that the money paid to his lawyer could be classified as payments for legal services. All right, well, to win, the DA now has to prove not just that this was an unreasonable thing for Trump to assume, but that Trump knew they were not legal payments and made them with the intention of defrauding somebody. All right, now we get to the big question. Who exactly was defrauded in this process? Well, that remains entirely unclear, and the statement of facts does nothing to shed any light on this. So, who are they suggesting was defrauded? Was it Stormy Daniels? Well, she got her payments, so there's not really any misrepresentation there. Maybe the American people? Hillary Clinton? The voters? The 2016 election itself? Well, that's going to be pretty hard to show, given that the vast majority of the American people have never seen any of these ledger entries, or the checks, or any of the rest of it. How could they possibly have induced us to act? What, were we all supposed to gather around the ledger for a reading before voting? Because if so, I missed that memo. Maybe you guys did that. I don't know. Let me know in the comments. Well, as we've mentioned, so that kind of addresses the issue of the crimes alleged and whether or not I think they're plausible. So if they're not terribly plausible, why are they being charged? Well, it's not because it's so easy to charge them. As I've mentioned before, crimes like this are very seldom prosecuted. And that's usually due to the expense of prosecuting them. Even in, the most basic circumstances, it still requires a deep dive into the books and records of a company. You have to hire forensic accountants. And the evidence is kind of hard to show. So it tends to not be worth the money to prosecute this stuff. Yet, here we are, prosecuting a former president of the United States, who, by the way, requires a Secret Service detail everywhere he goes, all of whom have to be paid. And I think they're paid pretty well, if I understand correctly. That sounds kind of expensive to do in prison. Makes me kind of wonder if just maybe justice and the rule of law are not the reasons that we're doing all this. Wait, is there an election coming up? There is, isn't there? You got me for a second. That's what this is about. But, all joking aside, why does the cost have to be astronomical here? Well, for starters, the case involves the former president of the United States. That ought to be fairly obvious, but in case it's not, the sheer logistics of providing security, coordinating court appearances, managing media attention, it's all enough to make a taxpayer's wallet tremble in fear, frankly. And that's not even taking into account the expensive legal fees, expert witnesses, countless hours of work that'll be poured into the case. It's like the prosecution's running a marathon despite knowing they're going to fall on their face before the finish line, all while shouting, "Look, we got him!" Kind of. Now, we know that someone out there is going to claim that LRI thinks the president should be allowed to murder people because it's just too expensive to do anything about it. No, full stop. No one is above the law, and we're committed to that principle. But the law also shouldn't be twisted into a sideshow and a political circus. As we've said time and again, the law must be kept distinct from politics if it is to be the law at all. And our fear is that this trial is going to do anything but that. When the charges against a former president involve an esoteric and relatively insignificant charge, supported by evidence that frankly doesn't really fit that charge, it's a little bit hard not to feel like we're in a legal comedy or a legal tragedy. Yeah, you might be able to convince a jury in the nation's most famous liberal city that a round peg can fit in a square hole, but there are much better things you could be doing with either, and you'll likely cause a great deal of damage to both. All of this leaves us wondering if this case is really a lot less about upholding the law and more about political posturing or making a statement. But hey, who are we to judge? We're just here to inform. So, as we wrap up this episode, it's important to remember that our legal system is designed to be impartial, fair, and just. When politics and personal agendas intrude on the law, the consequences can and will be dire. That's why we need your support. Because LRI's mission is to keep our laws out of the hands of those who would seek to bend them to their will, on either political party. This is not about your opinion of Trump. It's not about your politics. It's about the fact that the law needs to be independent from politics, and we all have an interest in that. Please consider making a donation to our organization to help us continue that work. We strive every day to uphold the principles of the Constitution, and you can make that contribution online at lexrex.org/donate. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more from the Lex Rex Institute. We'd love to hear your ideas about the Trump indictment. Maybe you think we're dead wrong. We'd love to hear it. Maybe you think we're right. Yeah, it's fine to hear that too, I suppose. Anyway, thanks for joining us, and keep fighting for our Constitution. You know that we will, especially with you joining us. So thank you for watching, and good night, folks.